And yeah, thanks so much everyone for joining today as well. It's so nice seeing everyone here. And yeah, it'll be so great to see so many people interested in UI UX and in AR VR as well. And yeah, happy new year to everyone. And big thanks to the students of UXD for also organizing this event and having me here as well. So yeah, without further ado, I'll just get started. So yeah, basically, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm born and raised in Malaysia, and currently I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. So as a day job, I'm a UX UI designer where I design usable apps and websites. But at the side, I freelance as a AR VR designer and innovator. So I just love like pushing the boundaries of immersive tech, like what Julia said just now. And yeah, just like love just trying out and experimenting with such a new and emerging tech such as AR, VR. And basically my whole aim in design and my design ethos is just to like aim to make a positive impact through design because I believe that our lives are so entwined with technology. It would be so great to, use design as a powerful tool to influence emotions, benefit others and so on and so forth. So yeah, this is a brief intro about me. So a little bit intro about my journey as well. Like I have a graphic design background, so it's like purely visual, purely aesthetic design. And after uni, I got a job at Google's Creative Lab in Sydney. So it was in Google's Creative Lab where I really like explore about AR. I got to work on their AR core product. And that's where my first interaction with AR VR began, and that kind of just led on to my love for AR VR and just experimenting with it. So I mentioned that I was from a graphic design background, and I guess what drew me to AR VR is that it's also a visual element, but it brings so much more depth to this visual arts. So yeah, that's how I love AR VR. And after like working at Google, I just kind of like went on a tangent of like just trying out things, experimenting things. So I just made an AR experience that includes like public transport in the Sydney train system. And yeah, I just posted on LinkedIn and it blew up and it featured on the news. So I guess that really like reinforced, people are interested in AR, VR, people were talking a lot about it. And yeah, people were responding very positively to like an innovative idea like that. So that really motivated me to explore more of this AR, VR like experiences. So apart from that, I also like hosted solo exhibitions, exploring the use of AR in art galleries. Like I said, I really enjoy visual art still. So in my art exhibition, I took my illustrations, make them AR activated, and like just have the audience just use their phone to view like the depth of the art. So behind like everything I do, I also aim to have a social impact to it. So each artworks that I like present and I have in my gallery, I have like some kind of social message behind it. So for example, like climate change, mental health, like social media. So I just really love to use technologies like this to come out with like a deeper message behind visual arts. So yeah, these are the few things I experimented with. And for the past few months and years, I've just been having like AR and VR workshops for like early stage startup founders and students. Was invited to speak at a Women at AR VR event. And yeah, I just love like sharing my passion, love just like igniting ideas for other designers like me or other like non-designers like me or like other non-designers to like just play with a new tech and just like, play with AR, VR. And yeah, so I recently also done an AR project with Adobe's AR team and platform, which is Adobe Aero. So yeah, like in AR, VR, there's also a lot of cool opportunities to partner with big tech companies as well. Like partner with a lot of people in the past and just like made AR like experiences with them. So that's obviously like a very good opportunity and it's a really fun field to play with in my opinion. So yeah, this is my journey so far. And if you can tell, it's just been a lot of like experimenting, learning as I go, while I still focus on designing for 2D apps and websites. So yeah, And before I go even further, let me just give you a brief introduction about AR VR. So yeah, what is AR VR as a tag? And I'll probably illustrate it in something we know quite well in the designer's world, which are like layers. So I'll start with AR. So let's say like, you have a road like this and you have like a Pikachu in the road and you have like a phone. So basically like AR is having an overlay of a graphic on top of your camera feed. So let's say like your phone, you have your camera activated, and basically when you pan across your real world, there's like a Pikachu that appears or any other graphics that appears. So that is AR, is basically a superposition of a graphic in your real world. And if you think about layers, you can think about like having a camera feed and just having something overlaid on top. And yeah, so that is AR in a nutshell, very basic introduction. And what is VR? So VR is slightly different compared to having AR where you have a camera feed and have an overlay on top. VR is completely immersive and completely contrived and 100% virtual. So let's say like you have the same road as before and you have the Pikachu in front of you. In a VR setting, everything will be completely made up. So your road is like completely made up. It could be 3D models. The Pikachu could be a 2D or 3D model and it's just completely like virtual. So yeah, I would say that like it's much more like immersive and it's also like a 360 environment. So if you look behind, there's the road as well. If you look at the side, there's also road. So completely in a virtual environment. And basically like after giving that really brief explanation, there's the difference between those two, which is quite obvious, starting with VR that is 100% immersive, whereas VR is 50% immersive because like I said before, it relies on a camera feed to overlay graphics on top. And yeah, so like VR has a complete virtual environment, but AR still includes the real world in it, which is the world you see right now. And VR is normally used with a headset or Google Cardboard, where your whole eyes is kind of covered with a headset or cardboard. Whereas in AR, you can use your phone or you can use AR glasses to experience it. So yeah, that's kind of like the main difference between AR, VR, and also these are like really basic explanations. And if you want to get deeper into the tech, there's a lot of like resources online to look into it. But yeah, and so basically, like after giving you a brief introduction about AR, VR, and having this event about UX in AR, VR, like why VR, why AR, VR is like quite emerging, it's quite coming, but yeah, what exactly is it and why do we have to look out for it as designers? So yeah, firstly, the global AR and VR market is expected to reach USD like 800 billion in the next like 4 years. So that's pretty crazy if it's expected to reach that much, means like more funding will come in and yeah, like more products will be made that includes AR, VR. So that's pretty crazy to think about it in 4 years. And secondly, there's a PwC report saying that 23.5 million jobs will be using AR, VR by 2030. And that again is like in 9 years. So it's pretty crazy that that many jobs would be using AR, VR. And actually, right now, there's a lot of jobs that are actually trialing like internal trainings using AR, VR. So it's not like a shocking factor, but it's just crazy to think that how much it influenced our lives in the future. And of course, like if let's say you're not really interested in a purely AR VR like product, 67% of advertising agencies are using AR VR for marketing already. So it's yeah, I think you guys have seen a lot of like marketing experiences, like for example, like Nike letting people trying their shoes on with like a 3D shoe in their foot. So it's like, e-commerce is taking AR, VR to the next level by letting consumers visualize a product. So yeah, in the marketing sphere, AR, VR is also quite prevalent in it. So that's why I feel like as designers, it'll be good to look out for the next big thing. And if you're interested to design for it, then even better. So yeah, really interesting space to be in. And yeah, so before I dive deep into like the UX of AR, VR, I would just like to share some like insights and stats. So in reality is like most people are not very used to AR, VR experience compared to the normal normal and often or common 2D apps that we use every day, like Facebook, Google, even like Chrome, the internet. Like in this graph right here, it shows that like these are the amount of people that use AR, VR experiences, but only once a month. And this is the amount of people. So compared to 2D apps, there's not a lot of people using AR, VR experiences. That's why more attention to UX is needed to create these experiences, because like you have your 2D apps where everyone uses it every day to help you with your daily life. For example, surfing the internet, surfing like social media, and even checking the weather. But not a lot of people like launch an AR, VR app every single day. So that's why like more need to like guide the users and more need to like push them to kind of like be familiar with the experience are needed. So that's why UX is really important. And I would kind of confidently say that like, if let's say you have your first few AR, VR experiences that are really bad, I think it will stick to you for life and it will deter you from experiencing it in the future. So like your first few experiences, if it's bad, it will affect you. And if it's like really good, it will encourage you to, like experience more AR, VR experiences. So I would say the first few experiences are very important to nail that UX right as well. And yeah, like, but the thing is, after designing for 2D apps and after designing for like AR, VR experiences as well, I do find that there are certain commonalities and certain similarities between AR, VR and 2D apps. And basically, the first one is thinking that you're shifting from a 2D canvas to a 3D canvas, which is like AR, VR, and also like shifting from a third person point of view to a first person point of view. So like, let's say you have your phone right now and you're like looking through an app, you're looking through like a third person point of view, but in AR, VR, you also have to kind of imagine that you're like the main character, you're like experiencing it in the first person point of view. So that'll be interesting to, design for. And thirdly, I do believe that some principles from 2D app design and websites can be applied to AR, VR as well. So they're quite interchangeable. And hopefully when I speak about the UX, like tips and tricks later on, like you guys can kind of like point out from what you're used to in design and just like apply it. But everything in AR, VR, in my opinion, is quite transferable. So yeah, we can get into it. So firstly, UX in AR. And for a bit of context, I'll be separating UX tips and tricks for AR and VR separately. As we've seen before, there are two different like technologies and two of them are experienced very differently. So I'll be separating the both. So yeah, we can start off with UX in AR first, which is augmented reality. So like I say, in augmented reality, you often use a mobile phone to experience it. So right now, I'll kind of talk about UX in a mobile AR perspective, because like AR glasses is not very common at the moment and mobile AR is more common. So that's most of the UX tips and tricks that I'll be talking about. So yeah, like firstly about onboarding. So definitely, even with 2D apps, you have an onboarding process. You'll teach them how to like do certain tasks and like how to like, assess your dashboard, assess your profile and everything. And in AR, it's really important to have an onboarding process as well. But because your onboarding process is in a 3D sphere, and like I said before, not a lot of people are very familiar with AR or VR apps and experiencing through them. So I would say that onboarding is quite important in an AR or VR experiences. So starting with VR, or starting with AR, sorry, starting with AR, like for example, onboarding experiences, you can have a tutorial part of the experience. So for example, in this gift right here, like there's a globe and then there's a frog hiding behind it. You know, you can like encourage the users to be like, you know, learn to like move around your environment. And if you find a frog, then good job. Like that's a reward for you. So like, you know, have a tutorial part of the like experience. You'll like engage more, like, you know, usability and like engage them to like move around, to be less scared about like experiencing this experience. So secondly is to avoid users, like avoid teaching the users everything at once. So yeah, it'll be great to kind of like, you know, not teach them everything at once, to overwhelm them, just like have bits and pieces or teach them one part after the other. So it's not too overwhelming for them. And thirdly, definitely like less text, more icons, because in like an AR space, you're also looking at the camera feed, like there's so much things to look at. You don't want to overwhelm them more with text. So you can use more icons, for example, like having an arrow, like pointing that way and then asking them to like look that way or like swipe that way. And lastly, also again with the frog idea, just like encourage the user to move around, not be shy, and just warm up to the idea of AR. So yeah, that's onboarding in AR in a nutshell. And secondly, relating back to the onboarding a little bit as well, it'll be good to encourage movements. So part of like the appealing thing about AR is that, you know, it overlays a virtual reality on your real world. So, you know, having like a common room like this, imagining like birds flying past and like dragons flying past, that would be so cool. But you also need to make sure that the users have the most experience out of it. So, you know, encourage them to move a little bit more, explore a little bit more about their space. So you can have like engaging animations to show the visual hints, like for example, having this bird guiding the user. And once the bird is out of frame, you can have like a little like pointer to like encourage them to look left or right. So that's a really useful tool to have visual hints to like show them where to look. And yeah, but one thing to be mindful of is that because AR relies on the camera feed, it like detects where your flat surfaces are, it detects where your walls are. It'll be good to not let them move too much because the phone will have a hard time reading the environment and then placing the graphics on it. So yes, like slow and steady would be good for them. So yeah, that's a good thing to kind of keep in mind about. So another thing that's really important is also safety in AR. Like, you know, I'm sure a lot of you have heard like don't text when you walk and everything, and it's true enough. So if you were to design an AR experience that could be used outdoors, like avoid distracting them so the users would end up like this poor guy right here, like yeah, smashing across the window. So basically, in terms of like promoting safety in AR, you can try to avoid covering the whole screen with too many graphics or UI elements. And just like in general, don't distract the user too much. So because like I said before, like in AR, I think the championing point of an AR experience is the camera feed and having things overlaid in your camera feed. So I do think that the camera would be the most like kind of like the hero graphic of them all in this app or like this experience that you're designing for. So think of it as like having other graphics as an add-on rather than an replacement. So yeah, always hero the camera feed and always like have like little warning messages like, oh, like be careful when you're experiencing this outdoors, and like, yeah, just be careful in general about like, having like the AR distracting you too much and having accidents like that. And I would say this is a very like UI centric tip, is to know the difference between world space and screen UI. So I have this little example here that is a Google Maps AR. So you can see that example of a world space UI is this one right here, where it's only visible when you pan to the right direction. And whereas like the difference between a screen UI is that a UI will always be there. So you can see right here with a little like this 8 minutes and a little map right here, this stays constant in the screen. And when you're designing AR experiences, it'll be good to kind of like have different UI placed in different like spaces in the screen. So for example, with screen UI, it would be great to have a constant there if, let's say, you want the user to take a picture or like record a video. Oh, sorry, record a video. So like, it'd be great to have the UI elements always there. But for example, with a world space UI, it'll be great if you want to display more information in the world so that you don't distract the users, and also like, you have more space to like encourage them to like move around and find this UI. So yeah, like having a difference between these two UI and plotting them while you're designing is also very helpful. And oh, sorry. And lastly, accessibility in AR. Like accessibility is obviously very important in any digital experiences. So definitely like one that is quite obvious is that showing text in AR. So for example, like having this GIF right here, like it would be great to frame your text in AR in a darker background or contrasting background, so it's visible from all angles. And because, like I said before, an AR is reliant on the camera feed, so you can't really control the background like a 2D app, but the background would always change depending on where the user launches the AR app. So to frame the text in a darker background or contrasting background would always be helpful for them to read the text. And yeah, so if let's say the user is not able to move too much as well, or they have to be like seated down, a good way to have them experience AR is to kind of like let them move all the 3D objects or all the graphics closer to them to let them experience it while they're sitting down. So that's a good alternative as well. And also like most importantly, this is about like mobile AR. Like imagine like having this phone and like looking at your world. Most of the time, I think eventually your hands will get really tired from holding up your phone and like pointing at certain directions. So avoid having the experience time longer than, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes. And also like definitely always test with your users to see if they're like feeling exhausted after a while. And yeah, I think it'll be important to, not to compromise their comfort, and yeah, have a good like experience time for AR. So yeah, that's kind of like AR in a nutshell. So UX in VR. So I would say that you in like designing for AR and VR is quite similar, but since in VR is a completely virtual environment, there are like certain different points as well. So as you can see before, when designing for AR, it's very much reliant or very much like coming up with design situations that adapts to the background. But in VR, we can set the background now. So it's less like, how to say, it's more predictable in a way, but there's also way more like things to keep in mind of in VR. So firstly, similar to the AR experience, onboarding will be great. So when a user like goes into this VR experience, and like I said before, like not a lot of people are used to AR nor VR experiences. So one cool thing to do is that in VR, you can give a scenario-based tutorial, like completing a task. So like I have in this GIF right here, you can see that you can flip your remote and select the red color. So this is a very fun way to encourage users to learn how to work the program out, and in the same time also like to like make them feel comfortable and make them more willing to stay in this experience more. And one thing that would be amazing is to include GIFs and graphics to onboard the users as well. So for example, what they have here, like flip the palette and then like select red as well. So yeah, with a combination of that, like the users will be more comfortable to be onboarded into a VR experience. And next, like same with the onboarding experience, it'll be great to guide them along the way. So the difference between like VR and AR is that I feel like VR has more like interaction tools. So in AR, both of your hands are used to hold the phone, but in VR, you have like two remotes to kind of like control what you want to do in the space as well. So it would be great to like kind of have all these instructions when like they're experiencing it. So for example, you can see here, you have like, little like settings in each of your fingers that you can choose. Or like in this example of Google Earth VR, you can like rotate it to like trigger something. So it'd be great to kind of like guide the users with this like instructions and kind of like these tools and menus in a way in that setting to like let them know what to do next. So yeah, and this is a quite interesting point as well, is that in VR, you can't expect the users to spin like 360 to kind of like experience the whole like experience, like VR experience, because like I said before, in VR it's a 360 experience. So like the top, bottom, left, right, at the back, everything is all virtual. But in terms of a user's perspective, it's very much comfortable to have like a certain degree of view and also a certain distance as well. So like you can see right here, there's like a 90-degree view, there's like a 154 degrees view, and there's also like a 0.5 meters and like 10 meters view. So it's recommended that you place designs or very like important task-based items within this view, like within 154 degrees and within 10 meters as well. And basically, yeah, you kind of expect them to be like, birds where they can just like move their neck 360, really crazy and stuff. So yeah, it'd be great. And basically this helps them to feel more comfortable. They can just focus on the front of them. And if you want them to kind of like move to the side, you can just prompt them to move to the side if needed. And that brings me to my next point as well, which is very important, motion sickness in VR. So motion sickness in VR is quite severe and a lot of people would tend to get it, but there are ways to kind of like prevent it in a way or make it easier. And I would say these are like UX tips as well, because it's ultimately like give them a good experience. You don't want them to like bath midway through as well. That would be quite bad. So for example, like having a comfortable view to your viewers, you can also like have this certain tips and tricks to make it easier for your viewers to feel more comfortable. Like for example, you can decrease the motion sickness by having a very consistent speed. So like not having like jerky speed, like fast in one point and then slower in one point. It'll be good to just give them a consistent speed to experience the whole things through. And secondly, of course, like reduce rotations and spinning. I think that would like really like how to say like really deposition them and make them really confused. So reduce the rotations if you can. And thirdly, it would be great to have sounds to match the virtual environment as well. And because that we are so used to experiencing world like just as it is in like real life, like having a completely virtual environment would throw us off quite a bit. So having like things to emulate real world such as sounds could help it. And lastly, this is a pretty good tip that I've kind of experienced it myself with the Google VR Cardboard is to have fixed graphics so that the users can have something to focus on. So for example, like they can kind of have a resting state, like for example, you can have like put them in a beach and the consistent graphic is the little sunset there that will always be constant. And whenever they feel quite woozy or like they're feeling quite sick, they can always stare at the sun to kind of like rest their eyes for a bit. So this is a good example of having like fixed graphics to kind of like give them resting states if they need to. So yeah, like again, accessibility is really important. You have it in AR, you have it in 2D apps, and you have it in VR as well. So let's say like someone is wheelchair bound and like you want them to explore a VR experience. And there's a lot of like VR experience geared towards the elderly and people who are like wheelchair bound as well to allow them to experience a different reality and experience like basically the outside world. So what you can do is that basically have very good like height calibration for the VR experiences. So in VR, if let's say you don't calibrate your height really well to the users, they would either see the VR scene as a giant or as a really tiny person. So I guess like something to combat that is to have really good height calibration so that people are not really thrown off to be like, why am I such a giant in this experience? Like, why am I stomping over all the virtual like environments? So it'd be good to adjust the height just right for them to experience it comfortably. And also like another tip to do is that let's say the users can't really like have like fingers to like tap the remote. One really interesting way to combat that is to have different inputs and interactions. For example, if let's say I can't press any buttons or so forth, I can have voice activated commands. So let's say like, oh, tap that rock over there, tap that tree over there. And yeah, basically I can just experience the VR experiences without tapping anything. So you can also like take that into account as well, having varied interactions for people to, command with. And lastly, also with same as AR, it would be great to not have it really long. So for VR sessions, it would be great to keep it within 20 to 30 minutes so that they feel comfortable as well. They don't feel very tired or fatigued. So yeah, having all these things and definitely user testing and also knowing your audience is really important in this case as well. And so the tips that I shared in AR, VR, they are quite like bite-sized tips. And these are like the tips and tricks that I've used a lot of times in my previous work that are quite impactful. But definitely there are more things to consider for UX in AR, VR. For example, animation and movements, like you can't really, yeah, like I said, can't really have too much rotations, can't really have too much going on. And a whole different aspect to that is the graphics component, which is 3D itself. So like for the 3D materials, like how you build your virtual world or how you do like AR assets, if you want to make it realistic or if you want to make it like low polygons as well, that's up to you. So I have an example right here, which is by IKEA. So I'm not too sure if a lot of people have heard of this app called IKEA Place, where you can place IKEA furnitures in your room to kind of like visualize how it looks like in your room before purchasing it. So I feel like this is such a good example of 3D modeling and also like UX point of view, where like, the shadows are really realistic, the size is quite accurate, and just all in all a great experience for the users to visualize things. So yeah, and also like with this example below as well, I would consider this kind of low polygon in terms of a 3D like space. And you can see how effective it is as well without being too detailed with the shadows and with everything. So yeah, I think 3D is also a big component in improving the UX of it. So yeah, there's a whole other like component with that. And also definitely another thing to account for is the target user's device. So let's say you're designing an AR app, you got to make sure that most of your target audience or your target users have the right smartphone and the right requirement to experience it. And same with VR as well. Like you must make sure that they have the right VR headset to experience it and what are the price points and so on and so forth. So it'll be interesting. And I feel like different phone models and different VR models do produce a different AR and VR experience. So it'll be good to account for that as well, very early in the designing process. And the lastly is to also have different interactions. So let's say like tap, voice, hover, long gaze, pinch. These are kind of like common interactions that you have in AR and VR experiences. So yeah, it would be good to like, have some user testing to see what your users are comfortable with. And if they're not comfortable, how do you make them comfortable in UX? So yeah, and that's basically like my UX tips and tricks. And this is down to the juicy part where how you can bring it to life. So here are some tips and tools on how to get started. And like I shared before, I come from a graphic design background, and I've just kind of like learned AR, VR through my work, through learning through the internet, and eventually learning how to code for it as well. So definitely it's not impossible. You don't need a degree or boot camp for it, but here are some tools that got me started. So of course, like really basic pen and paper. So in 2D, you get like this wireframes where you can like draft out and like sketch cute or like quick like app design when you can. And in AR, VR, it'll be helpful for you to sketch it out before actually designing it. So because like VR is more, it was here longer than than AR. So like more design principles are here longer than AR. That's kind of like my opinion. So they have more resources. So in VR, there are a lot of templates for you to choose from where you can see that they recommend the user's field of vision and basically you get to sketch over it. So it's quite a fun thing to like do, and you can use storyboarding that they use in animation as well. That's very important and a good strategy to sketch for VR experiences. And for AI experiences, like I say, there's not a lot of design principles that goes into it yet. So I've kind of like taken a jab at creating my own template like last year. So this is an augmented reality ideation template that I've made. And I've kind of like referenced a lot to the 2D template, but because AR has much more interactions, I just like put more interactions module there. So having templates like this to draft out your ideas could be useful in the beginning stages. And so yeah, this is basically the software and prototyping tools you can use after you sketch out your ideas. So I've kind of ranked them from easy to medium to advanced, but obviously it depends on how comfortable you are with certain programs. So I'll kind of start with the easy first. Like for VR, I started with 360 images and videos. So I could just like, screenshot Google Street View, stitch them up into a 360, put them in my Google Cardboard like this, and like just have them in VR. And you can do that with UI elements as well. And another really easy thing is using Adobe XD with Draft XR plugin, where you can basically have your 2D UI translated into VR. And for AR, there's a lot of apps where you can like kind of put in your image and put in a target image and then like pops up AR. So there's a lot of like cool things like that already. And for the medium tier, that requires a little bit more tools and a little bit more like onboarding to the program. So for VR, there's Toby and there's also like Microsoft. So basically these two programs need like some sort of VR headset, but they are good prototyping tools. And for AR, there's Spark AR, which is actually like the program where you make like Instagram face filters with. So I find that a very good prototyping tool as well, even though that's not made for the purpose. But I use Spark AR for my AR prototyping tools because it's easy and user friendly. And of course, Adobe Aero as well, where you can just drag and drop assets, put it in like AR, and that's really good and easy as well. And of course, the advanced heavy duty programs, you have Unity and Unreal Engine, which people like use those to like develop all these AR, VR experiences. So that's obviously much more advanced, and you'll use C# coding for most of it, and a lot more like coding programs if you want to add on more things. So yeah, these are basically a summary of softwares and prototyping tools that could be helpful. And yeah, basically, I'm done with my presentation and quite conscious of time. So I would kind of dedicate this time for Q&A now. So yeah, that's it for the UX for AR, VR. And yeah, hopefully you get to learn something new. And if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and ask.
Oh my gosh. That was so good. That I'm like overwhelmed with the amount of information that like I'm like trying my best to kind of like soak in. Thank you so much, Sarah. Everyone like do that little like clap emoji or give her a round of applause. That was amazing. Thank you so much for like helping us like dive deep into the world of AR and VR. I know that we have a few questions that I want to get through before time. And I know that some questions have already been answered. With your like last few slides, I think a lot of people were like thinking about resources and tools, which you kind of covered in those last few slides. But let me go and take a look. So Matthias, I think, said, I would love to know how what Sarah's creative process is when she did her exhibition or generally when it comes to AR and VR.
Oh, that's great. All right. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because I do admit that I kind of see AR and VR as kind of like two different avenues.
Mm-hmm.
One avenue I use it is like as an visual artist, like being like, as a kind of like a medium where I can use for like, spreading like a message, like basically a very artsy approach to it. And
Right.
there's another approach that is very like utility based. That's when you get the users to complete a task. And I'll probably start out with the artist about the exhibition bit that you mentioned about.
Mm-hmm.
Like basically for an artist kind of like AR VR experience, I would kind of target the objective that I want the audience to feel or to learn from this art piece or this art experience. So like if I want them to feel touched, if I want them to feel angry, I
Mm-hmm.
would kind of just plan backwards and have the illustration style to fit it.
Mm-hmm.
And basically all I have to do is just like, keep in mind about the art and keep in mind about the animations to bring a big layer into it.
Right.
And yeah, and I feel like for the other side, for more utility based AR VR experiences, one thing that I do in my creative process is actually storyboarding. So storyboarding in terms of like planning for an animation or like maybe an animated movie, like use
Right.
storyboarding methods as
Yeah,
well. But I think it's so important to use storyboarding as a user journey and plan out from there.
for
So
sure.
yeah, just like yeah, and
Yeah, yeah.
storyboarding is so fun.
I was gonna say like I was like, this might be a little bit overwhelming for us, but like storyboarding, we know that. Like creating user journeys, we know that. So I think that's like, something that we can start from. So that's super cool. And then question that we like quite a few people had, including Vicky and myself, is how and where can we get started in learning about AR and VR? You talked about how like you essentially learned through just like your work and like searching up on the internet. Is there, any specific creator that you like particularly look up to, or a resource that you like is your favorite that you want to kind of shout out for us to check out?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say that one thing that comes straight into my mind is someone called Patricia Reyners.
Mm,
So she, if you like follow her on Instagram, I think it's Patricia UX or something.
mhm,
And basically she focused on AR, VR in a designer's lens.
mm,
So that is quite helpful in terms of like getting your base knowledge, getting more like UX insights as well. And I would say in terms of learning and getting started, I think one thing to kind of have a foundation of is the technology. So like having the technology knowledge and
mm,
then like designing from then on. And when you design, it's more rooted in the technology constraints and
right.
how is it working. And I understand like I'm not a technical person, so like technology kind of balls me a little bit and like scares
Mhm.
me a bit. But yeah, like there's so many resources out there that visualize the whole process, like YouTube videos. There's
Mhm,
like some project-based videos as well from like Udemy, from like edX, Coursera, all
mhm.
these people that really breaks down into like layers and how the tech actually works.
Okay.
So I think from there it makes designing for it much easier. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, like,
Yeah.
I feel like this is so new. This is such a new realm. And like, having these specific people kind of take you step by step is super cool. And those resources are super helpful. So thank you for sharing those.
Mm.
And Julia Boo, I don't know if you pronounce it like Julia too, but she asks, or they ask, what insights or solutions examples can you give for communicating among users within the VR scape? Would texting be hard, like in VR, in AR? So but yeah, like that's an interesting question. Like, how do users communicate in that world?
Yeah, that's a good that's a good question. So I would say that texting in VR is like really hard because
Hmm.
imagine if you have two remotes and a keyboard in front of you, you have to
Yeah.
like type, type, type. So in terms of conversations in VR, if you talk to someone else in VR, it's usually voice. So
Mm,
you hear them in their own voice and you just have a live conversation like you're meeting someone in person.
right.
So yeah, I would feel like voice will be good. If you want to go an extra step, would be great if you could convert your voice into like text, so like auto
Yeah.
captioning or some
Yeah.
sort.
Yeah.
That'd be great. But yeah, I think like texting in VR and AR as well will be quite difficult. So,
For
but I
sure.
think yeah, but something some examples I saw online that people have done quite well is to limit their conversations through emojis or like other visual forms.
Mhm.
So if you want to restrict that conversation to that way, it's quite a fun way to like challenge how you communicate and in an easy, accessible way as well. So up
Right.
to you.
That's really cool. I didn't
Yeah.
even think about that. But that's really interesting. And I love too how you kind of rounded up your answer as well with, like how can you make this accessible as well? So the idea of closed captioning is definitely something that I know is going to be super relevant as well. So we have, I think, just to wrap things up as well, we have our last question from Chris and Gresha. They ask, what would be the best way to conduct a usability test in AR and VR? What are options that you would recommend, especially when we're doing things remotely?
That's a good question. And yeah, to be honest, like, yeah, I think this whole remote thing is getting in the way and it's also like having a bit of challenging like thing to it as well.
One
But
does it not.
I was, yeah, yeah, I know, right? Tell me about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I'll probably yeah, there are two different methods. So I'll
Right.
probably start off with VR. So in VR, like if someone is experiencing a VR with a headset, you
Hmm.
can actually see what they are experiencing in first person.
Oh.
So yeah, there will be like a
Oh, cool.
TV. and the person just like completely shoot with the headset and you can see what they're looking at.
Yeah.
So in terms of remote user testing, that would be easy because you can just share that first person view and
Hmm.
just like see if they like, jerk or they hesitate doing certain actions, and then you know where to improve.
Right.
But for AR, it's quite difficult. I would say that because remote testing as well, you got to make sure that the user is in an environment that is AR friendly.
Mhm.
So like it's quite hard to control that kind of circumstances, but I think what would be useful is to test AR experiences in a small scale remotely. So it
Mm,
could be just limited to a table,
right.
like experience it all on a table before going to a physical world, if let's say your AR is like a physical world thing. So yeah, like start small, probably like screen share, like get them to share their experiences
Yeah.
and thoughts, what they see, and yeah, but yeah, start small with AR, but for VR I think it's pretty good and easy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh
it's
my gosh.
accessible. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you. And I think, yeah, just like this idea too, because, like anything that's new, it can be overwhelming. So, like what you said about just starting small and starting from somewhere, I think is just a really good mindset to have. But oh my gosh, Sarah, thank you so
Definitely.
much for this amazing session. Like Vicky said, we're going to be um highlighting or spotlighting your article, especially with that the essentially like the wireframe paper AR and VR plan out sheets. We're going to make sure to highlight that and highlight the rest of your work. But thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming to join us. Make sure to also answer our feedback